بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين والقاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Since the beginning of time, human beings have depended on one thing for survival, and that thing is animals. Animals only dwell where water is. They provide food, they provide clothing, shelter, safety and companionship for human beings. Evidence of the importance of animals can be seen through how they have been worshipped by the people of ignorance throughout the ages for many thousands of years. For example, in the time of ancient Egypt, it is said that the people worshipped cats and saw their status to be so high that they were worthy of worship. And today, followers of the Hindu religion even worship cows, and they see their status as being so high that they are worthy of worship. And this is entirely forbidden, and this is entirely haram, of course. But because of the level of importance that such people have put on animals, it does not mean that we should then take away the rights and the importance of animals and to take their significance lightly. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that we should look after animals. But what is the status of animals in Islam? The first thing to mention is that animals are Muslims. Each animal placed on earth by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a purpose to serve. The Holy Quran states, "Have you not regarded that Allah is glorified by everyone in the heavens and the earth, and the birds spreading their wings? Each knows his prayer and glorification, and Allah knows best what they do." What this verse states is that all that is in the heaven and all that is in the earth and everything else in between glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And animals in the Quran are also mentioned as glorifying and worshipping God. According to one of our narrations, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam had heard the sound of a sparrow tweeting. And Imam Sadiq then goes on to say, this bird is busy praying and busy glorifying Allah. What has been derived then is that since animals follow the laws that Allah has given them and ordained for them, they are to be regarded as Muslims, creatures that submit their entire will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as a human who obeys the laws prescribed for humans is a Muslim. The most important verse that we will refer to today is from the verse of the Quran which states that there is no animal that crawls on the earth, no bird that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you. And in the Arabic verse, this verse, the Arabic translation, the Quran uses the term ummah, which is generally used to mean a human religious community. But he uses this term for animals rather than for humans. So we mentioned that there are animals that are mentioned in the Quran and their status is given in the Quran. In Surah 6, verse 38, we already discussed how this talks about animals and how they have their own community or have their own ummah, and they are part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creatures. And animals are generally very prevalent in the Quran. In fact, many verses are even named after animals, such as the cow, the cattle, the bees, the ants, the spider and the elephant. And overall, there are more than 200 verses of the Holy Quran which mention animals. Even one of the smallest animals on earth, which is the ant, has an entire chapter of the Holy Quran named after it. One of the interesting miracles of the Quran relating to animals is that apes are mentioned in the Quran. And interestingly, when apes are mentioned in the Quran, Allah uses it as an example of a punishment. Now, what you see from scientists today is that they've discovered that human beings and apes share about 98% of our DNA and our genetics with apes. And whilst this could be explained in that we are all similar creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of course Allah knows best, it becomes interesting when you look at this study sharing the similar DNA between humans and apes with the following verse of the Holy Quran in which Allah says, "Shall I tell you about the ones whose retribution with Allah is worse than that which you deem bad? They are those whom Allah has subjected to His curse and to His wrath, and He has turned some of them into apes and swine. those who worshipped the Taghut. And another verse of the Quran talks about apes when it says, so when those people were insolent about that which had been forbidden, we said to them, be apes despised. So scientists worked out that 98% of DNA shared between humans and apes is the same. And as Allah says in the Quran, He has turned some people, some of the wrongdoers, into apes themselves. And in this, Allah says there's a miracle for those who reflect upon it. The same can be said when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says that some people have been turned into swines. Of course, if you look now at animal testing and the way some companies test on animals, one of the animals which is most commonly used are pigs, swine, because of the similarities which can be found within pigs and human DNA. Now, when you think of animals and what we see mostly in this country, in terms of animals, in terms of pets, are dogs. Now, dogs appear 3 times in the Holy Quran, and the dog is an often misunderstood animal throughout the entire Muslim world. They are both hated, but they are also loved by some people. And the dog is an interesting example of how Allah has placed us in relation to other creatures on earth. From its position of protecting people of the cave, in the famous Quranic verse, to its simplicity, the dog is mentioned in the Quran in a few different ways. The first verse which talks about dogs says that you would have thought that they were awake, though they lay asleep. We turned them over to the right and the left, with their dog stretching out its forelegs at the entrance. If you had seen them, you would have turned and run away, filled with fear of them. And further on in verse 22 of this ayah, the dog is always counted as one of their numbers from Ashab al-Kahf. No matter how many of the others were numbered, the dog stood loyal beside them. Another verse in the Holy Quran says, lawful for you are all good things, and the prey that train hunting dogs, and the falcons that catch for you. Therefore, we can't put a blanket statement that says dogs are haram. Yes, the saliva of the dogs makes you unclean, but we also need to bear in mind that there are animals which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed you to have in certain circumstances, such as having a guard dog. And it doesn't take away from the fact that although they may cause impurity and uncleanliness, they should not be mistreated. Another big issue which is prevalent in the society that we live in today, and it's spreading even to the Islamic world, is the issue of vegetarianism and veganism, and the concept of not killing animals out of fear of cruelty. So is killing animals allowed? Well, of course we know the answer to this question. But do we? Some meats have been deemed as halal, and some have been deemed as haram, such as pork or the flesh from swine. And these are mentioned in the Quran as impure and as unclean. Now, we can't kill animals for fun. This is forbidden. It has to be done for a purpose which is deemed as halal, which we can look from the Islamic sources and texts to see. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has instructed that certain animals should be killed when they are found within the Haram of Mecca, that were called fawasik, which are the harmful ones, such as scorpions, such as rats. Now, some people, they think if they see what they could deem as a harmful insect in their house, that they are allowed to kill it. But this is not the case. This does not extend to animals such as spiders, for example. You cannot kill a spider unless your life is in danger from one. And when killing animals for slaughter, the blade of course must be sharpened so that the animal feels no pain. And of course, we know that killing any animal brings about some sadness to us, but it's a part of human survival. And it's not just Islam and Muslims that have focused on this concept, but since the beginning of time, animals have been used as a food source for human beings, and as a result, killing them for meat is something which is accepted and considered normal. In fact, killing some animals is even considered as a great sin, such as killing bees. Bees are highly revered and highly respected in Islam, as the structural genius of a bee and the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it is due and is the product of course, divine inspiration. The product which they produce, honey for example, is considered as a medicine in Islamic culture. And funnily enough, the importance that Islam gives to protecting bees is something which is shared not only in the Islamic world but in the scientific world as well. Albert Einstein, of course everyone knows what Albert Einstein is. His theory and what he predicted was that if bees were extinct, if human beings were responsible for the destruction of bees, then the entirety of mankind would be completely destroyed within a space of 4 years. And so Islam commands us to look after these animals and to be aware of the miracle which He has performed by creating them. What you can find in Nahjul Balagha from one of Imam Ali alayhi salam's sermons is that he has an entire sermon dedicated to peacocks. You know the type of bird, peacocks, and the beauty and the miracles of them. Now comes the issue of how we treat animals in a general sense. Our inner belief that we have, that all human beings have, says that we should care for animals. And the base example that we can use for this is that we can see from the Holy Prophet that he would see people in the marketplace sitting on camels whilst they weren't moving. They were sitting on them for fun whilst they rested. And he instructed people, you either ride the camel or you get off it. Don't sit on it and cause it undue distress for no reason. The Holy Prophet also once saw a camel whose feet were tied whilst holding its load on its back. And he asked the owner of this camel, he asked the people who surrounded the camel, where's the owner of this camel? He is not a man. Let him be ready for the judgment on the day of resurrection. As we already mentioned as well, tiny animals, small animals are not neglected in Islam. And it's actually the obligation of Muslims to defend the lives of these animals. The Prophet has even advised Muslims to avoid unnecessary walks at night time. Why? So that tiny creatures which show up during the night on the roads should not be trampled on and killed. The final thing to say in regards to the treatment of animals is that we should not and we cannot be cruel to animals, as there is always a punishment and retribution. Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam pointed out that there was a man who once terrified and caused fright and fear to a fox, and he brought a fire close to the fox's face out of what he thought was humour, but in reality what he wanted to do was to scare and harm the fox. And the fox wetted itself out of panic from what this man had done. What Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam says the punishment for that man was that he sent a snake to him at night, so much so that this man then wet himself in an intense panic in his own bed. Of course, we talked from the Quran and we talked from the narrations of the A'immah in regards to the status and importance of animals. But what do the scholars say? Some people think that the scholars remain silent on such issues and they only talk about certain things. Well, Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Gorkani wrote a really important message in regards to animals. He said Islam is the religion of kindness and love, and it does not differentiate between the creatures and their basic rights. And thus, animals in Islam enjoy certain rights. Islam recognizes certain rights and special status for animals, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his Imam's personality traits show that they were all opposed to teasing and harming wild animals. The Sayyid says, the creation of animals has not been in vain because the universe is a world of communications. However, human beings, as the Holy Quran reiterates and mentions, are incapable of comprehending all of the realities of the universe, which is the reason why some people illogically harm and abuse animals. Individuals and humans that disrespect animals' rights will, in the Akhirah, be questioned about those deeds, which is why we need to create a culture built on respecting animals' rights, which is necessary in our society. And the Sayyid says the lack of respect for the protection of the environment and for animals' rights has already created problems for our society. And we see that the people who disrespect and abuse animals and treat them poorly are weak in the fundamentals of Islamic belief. And what's interesting about what the Sayyid says here is that in America, in 71% of domestic abuse cases, in cases in the household where one person beats the other person or abuses them, in 71% of these cases, the person who commits the acts of violence has a history of abusing animals as well. So although the mistreatment of animals may be the first step in a person's journey towards evil, it then leads on to the abuse of human beings. One of the important stories from Rasulullah mentions that he was once doing his wudu for his prayer from a small pot of water, and one of the cats in his area walked by, took a look at the water, and Rasulullah could see that the cat was thirsty. So he stopped doing his wudu, he put the pot before the cat. And only after that cat had drank from the water and quenched its thirst did the Prophet resume his wudu. And by doing this action, what the Prophet showed was that by quenching the thirst of this animal, even a small one, was a noble act full of virtue and should be given first attention before even preparing yourself for prayer. And so, because someone asked me this yesterday, is it halal to own a cat? Yes. And Imam Sadiq doesn't just say it's allowed, but Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that the cat is part of the family and it is part of the household as well. And when I mentioned to my friend that tonight I'm going to be talking about animals in Islam, he said, Kumayl, it's muharram. Why are you talking about animals? You could be talking about so many other things. When we look to Karbala, we see how animals played a part in the tragedy of what happened. The horse of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was known to be very loyal and was raised by Rasulullah. It was known for its strength, for its endurance and for its devotion. In fact, this horse shielded the Imam with his body and was injured taking an arrow for it, which was meant to be struck on the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam during the battle. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam was brutally wounded, his horse came circling around him, rubbing his head on the Imam's blood. And it was then that Ibn Sa'd shouted, "The horse, get that horse, for it is one of the horses of Rasulullah." The evil forces then surrounded that horse, which kept kicking them with its front legs. It killed 40 of the evil soldiers and 10 of their horses. Ibn Sa'd then said, "Leave him and let us see what it does." Once the horse felt secure, the horse went back to the Imam lying on the ground to rub his head on the Imam's blood as he sniffed him. The horse began to neigh, it made noises very loudly. And Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam narrated that the horse was repeating the following words: "Retribution, retribution against a nation that killed the son of the Prophet's daughter." Some people say, what is the Imam talking about? How can a horse speak words? If someone is given the knowledge by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the Prophet Sulaiman, he is able to hear exactly what the animal is saying and to understand the meaning behind it. The Imam says the horse was saying, what an act of oppression, that they killed the son of the only daughter of the Holy Prophet. The horse then went to the camp, neighing and making loud noises, just as it had when it went to the Imam. And when the women came out and saw the horse without its rider and without its saddle put on, they went out and they beat their cheeks, their faces uncovered, screaming and wailing, going in the direction of the place where the Imam had been slaughtered. So what can we take from this? Why do we act as though animals are beings with no emotions or no feelings, or that they are not communities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put on this earth? When Imam Hussein alayhi salam succumbed to his injuries, his horse was the one who returned bloody to his family, alerting them to the ambush, and then died after discharging its final duty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained for it. This horse, before the Battle of Karbala, did not even want to enter onto the plain with the Imam on its back. It sensed that something was wrong in this land, and it stood still and would not move until the Imam walked in front of it and led it forward. Imam Hussein alayhi salam loved this horse to the extent that even seeing it thirsty, he wanted first to give the horse water before he would quench his own thirst. Now what happened happened to the horse of the Imam. According to some people, it banged its head on the floor so much until it eventually died. And according to others, it went straight into the Furat. But Allah knows best what happened to the horse. This horse reciprocated the love. For this horse, when it saw the enemy attacking Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, tried its hardest to protect the Imam and received numerous wounds and arrows in the process of doing so. And from this we see the animals play, of course, a crucial role in Islam, and it cannot be accepted by any of us to either commit or to witness an act of oppression towards them. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.